After all the shocks in week number 1, did week number 2 deliver? You bet it did. Let's talk all about it. This is the Full 10 Yards NFL podcast.
Hello, everyone. Cecil Martin here.
Hey, this is Hunter Henry.
What's up, man? This is Max Crosby, part of Raider Nation.
Hey, this is Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman.
Hey, it's Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks.
Hey, this is Jerry Judy, wide receiver for the Denver Broncos, and you're listening to the 14-Yard NFL podcast.
Yeah, after all the shocks of week number 1, week number 2 had its fair share of action, fair share of injuries. I'm sure we'll touch on some of those as well as we get through it all. Let's welcome the boys into the podcast. Steve, evening, my friend. How are you tonight?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. Brought back down to earth with a bump with Philadelphia's game against San Francisco, but still some positives. And yeah, it's just great to have football back, isn't it? Some more wonderful plays, some more wonderful action, and yeah, we're going to get into it.
Yeah, looking forward to talking all about it, mate. And Josh, welcome in, mate. How are you?
Not bad. I feel like we're well into the season already, week 2, and I already feel like I've got way more than I feel. I think I feel like the 6 p.m.s were a bit like a Monday, and the late slate really got me up. So I'm currently still sleep deprived. The NFL's still doing a good job at that. So yeah, let's get our teeth in.
It is, mate. Yeah, the primetime games have been particularly good so far this year. They seem to have struck quite lucky. Even the Thursday nighter between New York and Washington, that everyone's probably already forgotten about, served up a bit of a treat to open the week. But let's start with Sunday's action, and let's go back to front, if you like, because I think probably, certainly on paper, the game of the day was going to be the Chiefs and Ravens. We felt after week 1 where the Ravens, couldn't take care of business against the Raiders, and we saw what the Chiefs did against the Browns, that the Chiefs potentially were going to have a little bit of a field day. Ravens obviously dealing with an awful lot of injuries and suffered more injuries during the game. But eventually, at the 4th time of asking, Lamar Jackson does get the Chiefs monkey off his back. First time that he's actually been able to get the W against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. Obviously could have been a very different result had the final 90 seconds gone slightly differently, Steve, but great win for the Ravens, and certainly I think for the AFC it makes everything very interesting because there's only 2 undefeated teams, and I don't think anyone thinks those 2 undefeated teams are going to exactly run away with this conference. So it just shows how tight this AFC contest is going to be all the way down the stretch, isn't it?
Yeah, and you yourself predicted it a couple of weeks back that the Chiefs would lose their September unbeaten record, and so they have. Week 2, they go down to the Ravens, a real tight game, and as we were just saying off air there, Josh, you mentioned that the Chiefs the Ravens didn't necessarily win this game. The Chiefs lost it. And I think it was a lot to do with that fumble right at the very end. And, when you're a team as good as the Chiefs are, you can be defined by tiny single moments in games. And that fumble turned out to be costing them a game, and how important that could come to be towards the end of the season. And I think you have to start asking the question, should Kansas City be worried about their defense? They've just conceded 36 points, and they only just managed to creep past your boys last week. They're not shutting out teams. They've relied so much on Pat Mahomes and Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill to just bail them out of scenarios and just score more points than the other team. And I think you have to start asking that question.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Chiefs' defense, I actually had this stat saved for our preview pod later in the week, but they are currently the most expensive on defense at the moment. They ship 469 yards per game on defense. That is the worst. And in terms of points, it's 32.5 points a game at the moment, which is 27th in the league. Now, Cleveland and Baltimore are both excellent offenses, as we know. So that does have to play into it, and they've both been very high charged. Everyone's going to go at the Chiefs this year, but to have the Browns and the Ravens, one after the other, was always going to be a tough ask for the Chiefs. But it is something to be concerned about, I think. And also, just before we continue, gentlemen, I'd just like to bring you back to our AFC West pod, where I said that the Kansas City Chiefs will definitely lose their September reign this year by hook or by crook. And turns out it took 2 games to do it. They threatened with Cleveland, but no, it was the Ravens that finally broke the spell. You're welcome.
Yeah, I think, like you said, the defense has certainly got its questions. It's been the Achilles heel for a couple of years now, hasn't it? Everyone's always felt as though you can get after the Chiefs defensively, certainly in the run game. And I think that's obviously where Cleveland and Baltimore in particular obviously excel. They've obviously exposed the weaknesses that are there. I mean, to be fair to the Chiefs, they seemingly were in complete control of this game throughout. Their opening 6 drives resulted in 4 touchdowns, but the offense just sort of disappeared after that. It just, until that last drive that ended with the fumble, they had a further drive which just was a 3 and out, ended with a terrible interception. I think Patrick Mahomes has called it the worst interception he's ever thrown, and it was a real surprise to see him throw that ball up. To be honest, he was going to the ground. Wasn't a clever decision, and ultimately, field position could have been crucial at that stage. Next drive was a 5-play drive that only netted 13 yards and ended in a punt. And then obviously they seemingly were back to moving the ball, but like you say, Clyde Edwards-Helaire put the ball on the ground. And that was that, really. The Ravens, to be fair, came back from a horrendous start. Let's be honest, it was a horrendous start. And I've been critical of Lamar Jackson. I'll continue to be critical of Lamar Jackson. I still am yet to be convinced that he is a good quarterback in this league. But what he is exceptionally good at is running the ball. And another record yet again, another 200-yard passing day with another 100 yards on the ground. I mean, to be fair, Steve, 16 rushes, 107 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, to be fair, the last touchdown, I think even I could have scored it. He was that wide open. It makes you wonder what on earth the Chiefs were doing defensively.
It was a very good trick play, and even I was fooled. I was watching the game, and I was like, "Hang on a second, has he still got the ball?" And he somersaults into the end zone, and it's a great design play. And I think they rely on Harbaugh's experience in the league to play to Lamar Jackson's strengths, and I agree with you. I'm how limited are you if your USP as a quarterback is you're a mobile running quarterback? You look at guys like Michael Vick. He was a good quarterback, but he was never like elite quarterback, and he changed the league. And Lamar Jackson's very similar to that. And again, he still needs to prove that. However, we're sort of unloading on Lamar Jackson, and yet he's just beaten the Chiefs for the first time in however many attempts it's been. So, we've got to give him some props, and he's led that team. And whether or not they, Cleveland, Kansas City lost the game, or if the Baltimore won the game, they still come away with the win, and that'll be hugely beneficial to this, especially the depleted team that they are at the moment with the injuries they've got across the roster. This is a huge win for Baltimore, and it really does put them back in that playoff contention. And I wonder, I'm not suggesting Kansas City are going to fall away and go 5-12 or something, but it does make you think, like, for the last few years, the AFC has gone through Arrowhead every single time, and it just makes you wonder, are the scales beginning to tip a little bit? Are we seeing is another AFC team like a Baltimore or like a Kansas City or like a Cleveland or someone else like that, are they finally going to upset the apple cart after Kansas City's years of dominance?
Yeah, something which you said to me a couple of days ago, Shaun, after the game, say what you want about Lamar Jackson as a traditional quarterback in terms of that, that kind of goes out the window when you've got someone who plays like Lamar Jackson. He cannot be compared to traditional metrics. He can't be compared as a quarterback. I don't see him as a quarterback in the sense of a quarterback. I see him as just the leader of the offense, where he can do pretty much everything. I don't think he does have the best arm. I don't think that he even has an average arm by NFL standards, but he doesn't need it. He is able to come up with plays after plays, and he's gutsy as hell. I've got to give that to him.
Yeah,
he will drag Baltimore kicking and screaming through games. And that's pretty much what you want in a quarterback. So, you can say what you want about his passing, which I thought was incredibly poor, at least in the first half against the Chiefs. I couldn't believe my luck watching the first quarter, thinking, my goodness, we're finally seeing a complete unraveling. But no, he's gutsy play. And the fact that Baltimore are more than happy to run the offense through his talent. He's in the perfect situation there. It shows, and he will do what's necessary to get the dubs, and it's working.
I would just quickly before we move on, a quick shout out as well to Marquise Brown, who had himself a day. And we don't often talk about Baltimore receivers. Six receptions, 113 yards, averaging 18.8 per reception and a touchdown. So yeah, he had himself a day, and if he can keep doing that, then maybe he won't be as unhappy as he was last year.
Yeah, no, definitely there does need to be more variety in that offense. We talked about that in the preview pods, didn't we? Mark Andrews, 5 for 57. He certainly doesn't seem to be getting the same amount of targets and looks. He was 5 catches on 5 targets. We were used to seeing Mark Andrews with double-digit targets consistently. So there is definitely a focus on trying to get the ball outside of the hash marks. Look, like I said, I think in the grand scheme of things, I actually think it's a really good result. I think, in terms of the AFC, like you say, had the Chiefs won that game, that would have been 2 games against, teams that are favoured to be in and around the playoff picture. And if they'd have come out of that with a 2-0 record, it would have been a long way back for anybody in terms of, thinking about the number 1 seed and all that kind of thing. It seems ridiculous to be talking about it this early, but these games seemingly take on this kind of magnitude early, don't they? So, impressive win for Baltimore, particularly given the injuries, like you say. I think that can't be understated. The amount of transition that they've had to put up with in the recent weeks. None of these running backs were even on the roster last week, were they? So it's incredible, really, that they're doing as well as what they are. Let's go back then, fellas. A couple of hours on Sunday night, and we had a real wild finish. The Titans at the Seahawks. It looked like this was going to be a blowout, but that all of a sudden changed as King Henry suited up for the second half. He was a bit anonymous in the first half, but boy, did he take over in the second half, Josh.
Yeah, what on earth happened to the Seattle Seahawks? This game at halftime, you're there thinking 24-9 Seahawks. They're at home. And you're thinking, well, that's easy. And, are the Titans dead? Because they couldn't get anything going on offense at all. Henry couldn't get going. The passing game couldn't get going. I think I saw Tannehill on the floor more than anything else whenever Red Zone switched over to them. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Derrick Henry pretty much puts them on their back. Seattle's defense is a constant worry, isn't it, lads, really? For as good as they are, and the fact that every week you're guaranteed to have at least 2 plays where Wilson airs it out to Lockett and he's got about 30 yards of space around him. There seems to be the constant coming back to the fact that Seattle can't finish. They can't stand up on the goal line. They can't stop you from getting into the red zone. And I think it's going to be something of which we're going to be saying quite a lot this season. Seattle will win more games than they lose, but this shows that as long as you stay in the fight, you're going to be in the fight. And in fact, the Titans probably should have won it in regulation, because that Julio Jones touchdown that got chalked off was definitely a touchdown. I am not seeing what the refs apparently saw on that one. There was definitely a green line between foot and line. So, incredibly shocking. And also, one more thing before I pass it on to Steve is the fact that Wilson choked in overtime. The fact that his line was collapsing around him, yes, but the fact that he just kept holding on. I mean, you can't keep holding on in that situation when you're right by your line. That was easy as well, surely. I'll pass it on to you, Steve.
Yeah, and you talked about Ryan Tannehill earlier, and his stat line shows exactly what this Tennessee team's all about. He's 27 for 30, 347 yards, but not a single throwing touchdown. And he was sacked 3 times. But yet Derrick Henry's got 3 touchdowns himself, 182 yards. It just shows you exactly what this Tennessee team's about. And like you said, this game should have been over at halftime. Seattle were up 24-9. And we're dominating, and then they scored 6 more points the rest of the game. Like you can't lose a game from that, from being in control that much. And I read something really interesting, a funny tweet at the weekend. So that Seattle are such an odd team because when they're in the red zone and it's 1st and 10, they're not dangerous. But when they're on their own 23 and it's 3rd and 3, that's when Russell Wilson's dangerous. And all of a sudden they throw a 50-yard bomb to Tyler Lockett and they score a touchdown. They're the backwards sort of NFL team but they're so good at doing that. But it's just, to be a Seahawks fan, it must be so frustrating to think, why can't they do the basic things well? They can do the dramatics and they can do the big splashy plays. Tyler Lockett had 178 yards on Sunday, and he really, really shone in that game. And like you say, Josh, every time that you watch like the NFL highlights of the week clips on the YouTube for 18 minutes, you can guarantee there's going to be a Seahawks play where Wilson throws a bomb downfield and it's going to be Lockett or Metcalf underneath it with no defenders around him. Every week, it happens every single week. But it must just be really frustrating that they can't finish it off. And if they had that sort of oomph about them, I think they'd probably have another Super Bowl ring, and they'd be more often in the conversation to be hosting the NFC championship game as it rolls through. So yeah, it must be really frustrating. But I think the Titans sort of blew off the cobweb, shall we say, and put that week 1 defeat behind them, and looked a much more polished team. But like you said, there's one route to stop Tennessee, and if you can keep the king down, then you stop him. But he's proven that it's very, very difficult to do that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of credit that deserves to go to Mike Vrabel here as well. It's very easy when you're down by that much on the scoreboard to go away from the run game. That's the temptation, isn't it? Particularly when you've got, the studs that they've got out wide now in Brown and Julio. It would have been very easy, but I always, I've said this consistently. Tennessee will go as far as Derrick Henry runs them. It's as simple as that. As good as those receivers are, and you know what I think of AJ Brown, I think he's the potential to be very, very special. But they will go as far as what Derrick Henry runs them. And if you imagine lifting up Derrick Henry and putting him in a Seahawks uniform, how good would that team be? If you think back to the heyday of the Seahawks when you had Marshawn Lynch in the backfield and you had that Legion of Boom defense, like you say, you've got lots of highlight plays now. That 63-yarder this week to Lockett. There was a 68-yarder to Freddie Swain. Like you said, there's always these splash plays and they look fantastic. But that bread and butter of, like you say, some hard-nosed defense on 3rd down to make a crucial stop, a tough 2 or 3 yard run up the middle just to gain those extra yards to move the chains or punch it into the end zone. Chris Carson, I'm sorry, he got 2 touchdowns this weekend. He had 13 rushes for 31 yards. It's just over 2 yards a carry. That's not consistently going to be getting the job done. It's I think there are serious questions there in Seattle. It's a really tough division. We've talked about how tough that division is. And I think they've got an awful lot of questions that they need to answer, because I think a lot of teams will just make sure that everything is kept in front of them. It's been a bit of a trend this weekend. We talked about Marquise Brown in the last game that we talked about. He was wide open over the back of the defense. We had Freddie Swain just basically seemingly in half of the field on his own for Wilson to find him for 68 yards. I think defenses will very quickly just keep everything in front of them when it comes to Seattle and make sure that they have to grind it out, because like you say, at the minute, they're just not built to do that, do they?
And it's interesting as well that Seattle's the first team in the NFC West to drop a game. I definitely didn't think it would be Seattle of those 4 teams. We talked in the NFC West preview about how good that division is, and each of the other 3 teams are all 2-0. I didn't think it would be Seattle that would be the first to drop a game. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how they respond to that, and if they can still sort of mount that 11 or 12 game winning season that it's going to take to win the NFC West.
I don't know about that. I'd have probably said they would have been the first ones to go, just because they were playing the Titans. Before the season started, this was always a 50-50 game.
This game was there for the win, though. It was there for the win for Seattle.
Oh, absolutely. Just more of a case of, I'm not unsurprised that they didn't get the win when you look at it on paper.
Yeah, come on, Josh, tell the truth. You got Cliff Kingsbury fired by week 2 in your pre-season predictions. Let's move on to those.
So I'm going to say move on to that one because I
Let's-
can happily spit fire on that.
Yeah, let's move on to the Cardinals. They're quite possibly some of the luckiest plays I've ever seen in an
Kyler
NFL
Murray
game.
is the luckiest quarterback alive. How on earth has he come away from that smelling of roses? I don't get it. I was watching that game and all I could think was, you jammy git. Like, pretty much every 3 minutes when it would go back to it on red zone, I was like, for God's sake, how? There was one play in particular, and it will forever be burned into my brain, where Kyler Murray looks at he turns into a blocker. A Minnesota blocker is on him, and then he somehow just sort of bounces out of him and then finds a guy with like 20 yards of space around him because Minnesota decided not to play man-to-man or it was a cover 1 or something like that. And just give him all the room in the world. And then you got people going, oh, Kyler Murray, he's so great. No, he just oozes luck. And it pisses me off.
I think I'd defend Kyler Murray a little bit because
defend Kyler Murray
because I think you have to give him his dues that he's elusive and is possibly the best at it in the NFL. He is. Is it fair now to say that he is Lamar Jackson but a better thrower of the ball? Because he's got that elusiveness. You cannot take that away from him. He's got that ability to rush the ball when he needs to. He's very quick, but can he throw the ball. He's got an arm, and he's shown that the first 2 weeks of the season. And if the Cardinals are going to keep doing this, you cannot write them off. You can't. And I'm with you, Josh. I don't buy the Cardinals. I haven't for a while. And last season, that 8-8 season where they lost like 5 of the last 7, you look at that and you think, well, yeah, of course it is. It's the Cardinals. They were never going to go, a positive season. But if he keeps playing like this, and this team keeps playing like they are, and they keep, at the end of the day, the NFL is just about winning the game in front of you. And I know they only won it by 1 point, but they still won the game. And if they keep doing that.
They're going to get found out. They are, and I'm gonna save my main point for when we talk about game balls later on, because there's one gentleman in particular that started to work it out towards the end of that game. But there's 2 things of which get me about the Cardinals' offense, of which is whenever Kyler Murray throws the ball, he seems to just lob it. It seems to just be lob and pray. It goes to a guy who's double covered, and yet his guy turns out. Arizona's wide receivers are elite right now. Like, even Rondale Moore, I'm putting into the goddamn Hall of Fame, because there are some catches that they're making of which are just obscene. The wide receivers are elevating Kyler Murray's stats at the moment. But also, the fact that he's buying time that he doesn't have. He is on borrowed time. When linebackers start realizing that you don't charge Kyler Murray at the start, but keep him in his pocket, he's far less dangerous. It's something that the Vikings were starting to do towards the end. They weren't rushing everyone to get after him because, like you say, he is elusive. I love the word elusive as well, because elusive just means running out of danger that is constantly there. So yeah, they got the win, of which again the Vikings seem to have shot themselves in the foot, because I felt like this was the Vikings for the taking. Kyler Murray somehow won this game, rant over. Oh, and Kirk Cousins balled out. If we're talking about QBs that deserve props, Kirk Cousins somehow ends up eating a loss, whereas I think he had one of his best games in a Vikings jersey on Sunday. He was 69% accurate with a 122.4 passer rating. You don't see that a lot from Kirk Cousins nowadays. And that first minute pass, that 64-yard bomb to Osborne, wow, what a state of intent. What a statement of intent that was. And with that, I cede the floor.
Yeah, I think there's certainly an element of luck with some of the plays. I think you mentioned the Rondell Moore one is, I think, the one that you were describing, that he scampered down the sideline and ended up in the end zone. I think there was an even more lucky one that seemingly bounced off a defender, then hit somebody else, and it ended up in the hands of Max Williams, the tight end.
Yeah,
there are a few of those. I've got to agree with Steve. I do think he's probably not as good of a runner as Lamar, but I certainly think he's a better passer than Lamar.
Yeah, there is that.
Yeah, I mean, look, though, let's face it, the elephant in the room here. If Greg Joseph makes a 37-yarder, this is a 1-1 Cardinals team. So, let's not get too carried away. Greg Joseph left 4 points on the field on Sunday, which, as a Browns fan, I've seen Greg Joseph do that previously, so I wasn't overly surprised. Although, isn't the NFL just wonderful? Makes them from 52 yards away, but the 37-yarder, it's amazing what a bit of pressure can do, isn't it, boys? Amazing what a bit of pressure can do.
True.
And the Cardinals next week, they go to the Jaguars, so that's probably going to be a W. But then after that, they've got the Rams, the Niners, and the Browns. So if they can come through that unscathed, then we have to start talking about them as a Super Bowl contender. But that's a big 3 games there for the Cardinals.
Yeah, it is. And I think if you'd have said to the Cardinals at the end of that 6-game stretch, if you include the 2 that they've already played, if they could have come out of it at 4-2, I think they'd have been quite happy with that. Like you say, you assume they get the win next weekend, and then, like you say, even if they only take one of the next 3, I mean, for them, they probably want one of the NFC West counterparts, but certainly if they can get one of the wins out of those 3, I think they'll be sitting quite pretty. Let's talk another NFC West team then, boys. Interesting game in the early window. The early window, as Josh said at the start, kind of just sizzled really. It didn't really set itself alight, did it? The early window, but probably the most entertaining game, or certainly the game that had some strange happenings, let's put it that way, was the Rams and the Colts, Steve. So good to see your old friend Carson Wentz has managed to do something that nobody ever has seemingly done in the history of sports injuries, and sprained both of his ankles on one play.
Yeah, I know. Apparently he's got a double ankle sprain, and they don't know how long he's out for, which is just... I'm just not surprised at all. I defended the guy for as long as I possibly could about him not being injury prone, but it seems to be that he is. And you know what? After watching him play for Indianapolis last week and this week, it's just the way he is. He just holds on to the ball for too long, and it's just what he's always done. And when he's on your team, you sort of defend him, but when you're not rooting for him anymore, you sort of watch it and go, wow, you need to be getting that ball out. But I'll give him props for the one play he did make down the field to Michael Pittman. He held onto the ball for a long time, and he had Aaron Donald in his face, and he made that throw to Pittman for, I think it was 42 yards, but boy, that was a good throw. So when he wants to be, he can be accurate, but 3 sacks, 27 yards lost, a rating of 86.3, it's not great, and now could potentially be out for, who knows? If it's a high ankle sprain, that's 6 weeks usually, something like that. So, already that's in question his longevity. But I think we cannot mention Carson Wentz without talking about that shovel pass. Oh my God. Don't think I've ever seen someone intercepted on a shovel pass before. It was, I saw Twitter was blowing up with it. It was like, what has Carson Wentz just done? And I was like expecting like this, this big dramatic touchdown pass. And then I saw it, and I had to rewatch it like 3 times. Just like, what has he done? What is that? For those who haven't seen it, just watch it. Just watch Carson Wentz's interception from the weekend. And I promise you'll be gobsmacked like I am.
Yeah, it was a bizarre play. It wasn't the only bizarre play as well. I mean, I've watched the. I don't even want to call it a muffed punt, because that would suggest that the kicker did something wrong. The only angle I've seen it from, to be fair, is the angle from behind. It's very, very difficult to see. But essentially, the snap comes back, hits one of the up men, then rebounds sort of across the end zone. I mean, to be fair, Johnny Hecker, for some reason, then tries to pick the ball up instead of just absolutely putting his foot through. I never really understood why he tried to pick it up. And then, like you say, obviously the Colts pounced on it. I mean, it was a game that the Rams were seemingly in control of, and then all of a sudden they found themselves behind going down the stretch. But Matthew Stafford, as ever, he's always been reliable, hasn't he, in the fourth quarter? He's got that record in Detroit where he's won many a game. Josh, I know it's not a game that you've seen an awful lot of in terms of the 6 o'clock window, but a couple of standout performances there, particularly Cooper Kupp, 9 receptions, 163 yards, a couple of big touchdowns in this one. He's one of these receivers for me that always sort of sits in that underrated category. I don't know what your view on Cooper Kupp is, but he's never talked about in the sort of top 5, maybe not even the top 10 in the position, but he's always a good, reliable target, and like I say, a good day for him in particular.
As someone that has Cooper Kupp in many a fantasy league, I would like him to continue to be very underrated, because you can always get him for a steal and he can come through for you with 35, 36 points like he did this week. Not enough to topple you in the Dynasty one, but hey ho. Yeah, it wasn't even my teammate. No need to celebrate. I adopted an orphan. But no, Cooper Kupp has been outstanding for Jared Goff as well as Matthew Stafford. The chemistry that them two have got already is fantastic, because they connected on a fair few passes against the Bears as well, and you can see that it is a partnership that's going to flourish at least during Stafford's early career with the Rams, because that trust is developed already, and we know that first-year quarterbacks in a new scheme like to pick on one particular receiver because it's always a trusted out. That's going to be Cooper Kupp. So if you've got Kupp in a fantasy league, guys, play him every damn week, because he's going to get touches, and because Kupp is a fantastic receiver, he's going to get yards.
Yeah, most definitely, mate. Just one final word on the game then, Steve. Jacob Eason obviously came in of relief of Carson Wentz. You've got to be slightly worried now if you're an Indianapolis fan, if Carson is going to miss some significant time. I mean, Jacob Eason, obviously no tougher assignment, I suppose, than the Rams defense first up. You just finished 2 of 5 for 25 yards, obviously threw the pick to Jalen Ramsey as well. I mean, dare I say it, this is a season very, very quickly looking as though it could be derailed before it's even got going.
And I think I was reading that, with who's on the hot seat, I know it's obviously very, very early to start that conversation, but this is the NFL. Coaches have been fired after 6 weeks before, so it's never too early to start that conversation. And you start thinking, unless there's some serious injury problems that you can sort of use as an excuse, Frank Reich's got to be feeling his seat getting a bit warm, because he's had a few seasons now and he's had some good players, in that roster, and they still have a good roster. And if they slump, they've got to go to the Titans next week. And if they lose that, they're 0-3, which is not the start they would have wanted. I know it was a tough opening for them, but 0-3 is not the start they would have wanted. And then they've got at the Dolphins and again at the Ravens. So they've got a 3 road game stretch coming up. And especially if Carson Wentz is out for those 3 games, you can't picture Jacob Eason leading them to winning any of those 3 games. So Indianapolis starting 0-5. Let's just play the game and assume that happens. That is a nightmare start. And then they've got a home game against divisional rival Texans, who, are surprising a lot of people. And are certainly not the pushovers that we all thought they were going to be. All of a sudden that becomes a pretty important game. And yeah, I think in Indianapolis, if things don't start calming down, the wheels could very quickly start coming off. And I'm never been 100% sold on the Colts, but this is just showing you that they've, I don't quite think they've got enough to sort of, certainly not to take it all away. And at the moment, I'd be very, very surprised if they're in the postseason unless some major things change. But like we said, a lot of this is going to be dependent upon Wentz and what his injury prognosis is.
What I would say to that just before we move on is I wouldn't lay that at the feet of the head coach, simply because QB injuries, you get the mulligan. So if you end up 0-5 with your QB1 out for 3 weeks and you've not got a competent QB2, that's on the GM. Chris Ballard's far more on the hot seat than Reich is. And to be honest with you, with good reason. How have you not brought in Nick Foles yet? Nick Foles is literally just there waiting. Cam Newton's just there waiting. Realistically, if he's out for considerable time, gotta bring a guy in.
I think they're going to have to bring a guy in. I was just looking at the depth chart as you were talking there, and like you said, Wentz, we're assuming now he's going to be missing for some time. Sam Ellinger, he's already on IR. He was down as the third QB. It only leaves Jacob Eason, so somebody will be being signed, you would imagine. So, like you said, we'll wait and see whether they swing a trade or they bring in a free agent. You mentioned, Steve, that the Texans were a team that were still surprising a few people. Let's talk about some surprises. Josh, let's talk about your power rankings. It got lots of grief last week, mate. Very difficult to do power rankings in your defence after week one. There were so many surprises, so many shocks, and I thought you gave a very good explanation of your thought process and logic behind how you had people where you had them. It's all a bit of a matter of opinion. We're not going to go through the whole list from 1 to 32, but just tell us a couple of your big movers and shakers, mate, and who makes up your top 2 or 3 and your bottom 2 or 3 as well.
Yeah, so as a prologue to it, I did say that after week 2, things would start calming down a hell of a lot more. And you two, after seeing advance notice, both said, yeah, that looks a lot more like it. It just took a bit of calm, a bit of general, just allowing things to take their course and take shape. So, yeah, with that in mind, so the top 5... I'll give you the top 5. Bucks stay where they are. Chiefs in second. Just because I think that those two are still the class above. The Chiefs lost the game to the Ravens, I feel. Not the other way around. Rams into third now. Ravens into fourth because they won the game against the Chiefs. Then the Browns in 5. Yes, the Browns won and yet go down 2 spots. It's just because the other two are just showing me something more at the moment. The Browns didn't disappoint against the Texans, I thought, but they still showed that the defense has got a fair way to go before we can start calling this team elite. In terms of the main shakers from that, the Seahawks dropped to 7. The Titans move up 3 to 9th spot now. Dallas and Chargers move down a spot to make that happen. They're now 11 and 12th. Arizona have stormed up by, I think it's 4 or 5 places to 14th. The Raiders are now 15th because the Raiders have had a great start, haven't they, lads? We've not even touched that today, but they've been incredibly good on offense. 458 yards a game. It's the best in the league. In Arizona, 445 yards a game, second best. So yeah, I can complain all I like about how it's happening, but hey, it's bringing up the results, and they've got good enough defenses as well. 11th and 16th, Arizona and Vegas. Pittsburgh are up a spot to 16th, but that's only because the Dolphins and the Patriots are not as good as I thought. I've sent Miami, New England, and New Orleans down several places. They go 17th, 18th, 19th. Denver goes at 3 to 22nd. So, Steve, you get your wish that the Denver Broncos do move up slightly. Simply because of the fact that the New York Giants actually gave a bit more to Washington than I thought they would. So I felt like Denver actually did deserve a little bit of a jump up. Then I've got the Texans have gone up another 2. Their ceiling has been knocked down and a new ceiling has been built. They are now 28th. Honestly, it's actually a relatively frisky side. Like I said, the Browns-Texans game, I wasn't so much worried about the Browns as I was impressed by the Texans. I didn't expect them to put in quite that performance. But Tyrod Taylor is now down, which means it's Mills' season. That's right. It's another brag by me. I did say that Tyrod Taylor would go down in an injury within the first few weeks and we'd have Mills' season. It is here. Relish it. And sorry, Tyrod Taylor. Falcons down 2 to 29. They just look god awful, don't they? They got a lot of points against Tampa, but the game was done by then. Jets also go down to 30. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't think that there's too much to lean on there, chaps.
Well, let me and Steve do the leaning. Your article will be on the website and everybody can check it out and give you a load of stick as they did last week. Steve, there's a few teams we haven't really touched on. We're going to keep it brief because of time constraints, but let's just whiz through a few of these teams if we may. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, let's be honest, they should have a power ranking all on their own, shouldn't they? Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski, just ridiculous, aren't they?
Yeah, and I was it on the Manning's Monday Night Football cast? They had Gronkowski on, and he said he doesn't even watch tape; he just runs. And I thought that's such a Gronkowski thing to say. Doesn't even bother watching tape because he's about 8'3" and he's about 400 pounds. So I mean, I don't really blame him. He's made a career out of just being in the right place at the right time and being able to muscle his way through. So yeah, the Bucks are obviously a top, and until they get beaten, I don't see any reason why they'd move. The only thing I would potentially pick is I'd probably have the Rams over the Chiefs. I think the Rams have shown that they are this now an elite team with Stafford. He's, like I said last week, he's taken them to this next level that Goff couldn't get them to. And whilst their defense is perhaps not quite as good as it was last year, I think this offense is elite. And like you said, like Cooper Kupp is having himself a real good season. But we're talking minor details.
We are, and here's my one thing because I did consider it for all of about 5 seconds. The Colts stuck around with the Rams pretty much to the end, and Eason was in.
Yeah, I mean,
Eason had a chance to win that game against the Rams. I can't give them second spot if that's happening.
I think a lot of that is perhaps though that punt that was. I don't even know what happened. That ended up in an Indy touchdown. So it's, the Rams' special teams has almost cost them the game there. But yeah, I mean, everyone else is sort of Green. We haven't even touched on Green Bay yet. They came back with a bang last night. Aaron Jones had himself a hell of a game, and they looked really, really good last night. So Green Bay probably back in the conversation again. I'd perhaps have the Colts down a bit further because I think the Cardinals and the Raiders deserve to be higher. That's it. But apart from that, and I would also, if we're going to flip it right over, I would make the case to have the Panthers higher as well. The Panthers are quietly, again, pinch of salt, we're only 2 games in, but the Panthers are quietly having a very, very good season, and their defense looks very good. And they dismantled that Saints team. And in my predictions for the weekend, I picked the Panthers to overcome the Saints because I did think we talked last week about how it was just a flash in the pan win for the Saints. Winston had 5 touchdowns from 150 yards, which is such a weird stat. And the Panthers proved it, and Darnold is beginning to get some real good chemistry with those receivers. So, yeah, I'm going to be interested to see the Panthers and whisper it quietly, but could the Panthers be the second best team in that division? Perhaps.
I think there's every chance, boys. I think there's every chance. Like you say, the article will go live at some point later tonight. Digest it, dissect it, and tell us where we've got it all wrong. But like you say, it's not a bad list whatsoever. Not a bad list at all, mate. I certainly think it's taking shape. Let's put it that way. Like you say, only 2 undefeated AFC teams through 2 weeks. Who'd have picked the Raiders and the Broncos, fellas? That just shows you how difficult it is to win in the NFL. And the Broncos get the Jags next week. So is it the Jags? No, it's not the Jags. Who the Broncos got?
Jets.
They've got a relatively easy game. Jets, that's it. Jets. So the Broncos are going to go 3-0. They could be the only undefeated team in the AFC. So
Denver Broncos. How?
I think people are. No one's surprised at how good their defense is. I think that was a given, but I think people are surprised at how well Bridgewater's settled into that offense. And Cortland Sutton had that really good catch yesterday. On Sunday, he's obviously come back in and has offered something immediately to that offense. So yeah, they seem to be clicking. And again, the Broncos are a bit like the Panthers. I know that division's tough, but could they make a charge for the playoffs? I know, obviously, very, very early days, and they've had probably 2 easier games. And when the divisional games come around, that question might get answered. But, started well.
I think they play the Ravens in week 4 or 5. I think they've got
4,
an easy... Yeah, 4. So you've got this. They'll be 3-0. They'll be riding high. The spread will be about 2 points in Baltimore's favor, and that's where you just hit the over. That's where you just put your flipping house and everything on the over because the Baltimore Ravens will absolutely smack them down by the looks of it.
So, I can sense a sandwich bet coming on, mate. We'll leave that for next week's pod, though. Let's finish wrapping up week 2 before we start talking about week 4, fellas. Let's hand out some game balls. Shaun's done another brilliant article which went up live on the website this morning. If you haven't checked it out yet, make sure you go and do so. Look forward to reading them every week from Shaun. He's picked his offensive, defensive, coach and play of the week. Very quickly, boys, going to go through and ask you the same questions. So let's start offensive player. Steve, who are you giving it to?
I think as Josh said, again, Derek Carr certainly deserves a shout again. Had another phenomenal game, but probably Tyler Lockett. I think again in that Seattle offense, he constantly comes up and makes plays, and he had another 150 plus yard game. So one of those two for me.
Josh.
Yes, I've actually been quite aligned there. I've got either Cooper Kupp, Tyler Lockett, or Cortland Sutton, the wide receivers, because they had great games. You don't see stat lines like this often in the league, and they should be celebrated.
Yeah, no, difficult to disagree. I've got to be honest, I'm going to go with Shaun, though. I think Derrick Henry, I think he literally put that team on his back, and, to produce such a stunning comeback. He didn't obviously kick the game-winning field goal, but he was instrumental on that drive in overtime as well to set them up for the field goal. So certainly some big performances that you could have chose from there. Shaun's mentioned a few of the guys that you mentioned as well. Defensively, Shaun went with Danielle Hunter. Josh, you said you were going to make a point when we got to this section, so I'll come to you first. So who are you going with Defensive Player of the Week?
So I'm going with Shaun's pick, actually. I'm going with Danielle Hunter because he does what you need to do against Kyler Murray, of which is to shed your block, but then wait for Murray to make the first move. Because if you keep him in the pocket, he loses all of his power. Most of his power is him running all over the shop until wide receivers get free. I'm pretty sure Arizona don't actually run routes. I'm pretty sure that they just run into spaces, and it works. But Danielle Hunter, he got, 3 sacks and seven pressures, mostly in the second half. That's what you want from your edge rusher for the Minnesota Vikings against someone like Kyler Murray. So absolutely. Special mention as well to Tyrann Mathieu, just for those 2 first half ints. And then I went to bed thinking it was done.
Yeah. Steve, are you giving yours head too?
I'm going for someone that he's actually mentioned in his article, and that is Tampa Bay safety Mike Edwards, because he had 2 pick sixes. I mean, say what you will about how they just miraculously landed in his arms and he was 10 yards from the goal line, but still having 2 pick sixes in a game, that is, we waxed lyrical about Chandler Jones, who, by the way, had a very, very quiet week this week. He had 5 sacks last week. He must have used all his energy, and had a very quiet week this week against Kirk Cousins as well. You would have thought he might have picked up a couple, but he didn't. So, I'm going with Mike Edwards, who padded his stat line nicely with 2 pick sixes. So, yeah, I thought that was an impressive performance.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think, again, like I say, I think Shaun's probably hit the nail on the head, but I think, you can give a shout out to a couple of collective defenses as well. Buffalo pitched a shutout, doesn't happen every day on the road in Miami in September. Obviously took Tua out of the game early, with a completely legal hit. They were just swarming both Brissett and Tua when he was in the game all game long. Big bounce back for Buffalo, and of course, Bill Belichick dialing up another beautiful game plan, confusing the hell out of a rookie quarterback. Poor Zach Wilson. Deary me. Deary me. 4 interceptions. I think at one stage he was 4 completions and 4 interceptions, wasn't he, boys? They obviously went easy on him after that because he ended up completing, quite a few passes after that. But yeah, at one stage he was four completions, 4 picks. So not a good day at the office for the Jets. Let's talk coach then. Shaun went with John Harbaugh. Steve, who are you giving your coach of the week to?
There's a couple of candidates. I'd say certainly Sean McDermott. A shutout for any team is incredibly impressive, and Buffalo came with a real comeback performance this week, and really, again, I think there was a couple of teams this week that sort of, just picked themselves back up and said, right, let's forget about week 1, we go on, we go again, and yeah, I think Sean McDermott, certainly gave a good account of himself, and I would also say Matt Rule as well for Carolina. After New Orleans' performance in week 1, that's a difficult game to have them come in to visit after their, keeping Green Bay to only 3 points and putting up 38 themselves, to then only scoring 7 points against a Carolina team that most people were saying would be sort of a 500 team. So yeah, Matt Rule would be my other suggestion.
Josh?
I have to admit, this is one of which I didn't actually do any research for, I'm afraid, lads. Literally, I've done something for everything else. I've even got second and third ones, but nothing for the coach one. Just because I find it quite difficult, in effect, to actually pick one out. I'd probably end up going with what Shaun's actually gone for, but I'll let you tie that up nicely, Shaun.
Thank you very much. That's no problem, my friend. I mentioned Mike Vrabel earlier. I think he deserves a lot of credit. Big comeback on the road, and obviously, like I say, sticking to your principles and your game plan. For those of you that have been with the full 10 yards for a while, you'll remember we had a section called Jason Garrett Corner. So I'm going to flip this on its head. I'm not going to give you the coach of the week. I'm going to give you the dumbest coaching decision of the week. I watched it live. I didn't understand it live. It's now 2 days removed, and I still don't understand it. Houston, 3rd and 13, gained 12 yards and were given a penalty, which would have made it 3rd and 8. They declined the penalty to set up 4th and 1. Now, if they'd have gone for it, fair enough. They decided on 4th and 1 to punt the football. So rather than keeping the offense on the field, they decided to punt the football, and then just to rub salt in the wound, the punter put it straight into the end zone as well. So quite possibly, David Culley, one of the most baffling head coaching decisions I've ever seen. So maybe not necessarily coach of the week, as opposed to a certain different C word of the week. I'll let you fill in the blank there, ladies and gents.
I mean,
Final one, boys.
It's Joe Judge. He's obviously started a trend of ridiculous coaching decisions when it comes to flags. And just quickly on that, there were no coaching challenges during week 2 this week. That's the first time it's happened since 1999. No coaching challenges whatsoever. Obviously, everyone's seen Joe Judge and gone, oh, God, I don't want to be caught. I don't want to do a Joe Judge. And they've all just left their red flag in the locker room and gone, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it.
That's it, man. Better safe than sorry. That's what everybody thought. Let's finish it off then, feathers. Play of the week. The final bit on the article that will go up every week. And like I say, if you haven't done so already, please do go and check Shaun's fantastic work out. He went with the angry run, if you like, from Damien Harris. Was a fantastic play. Steve, who are you giving yours to?
There's a couple of candidates. Justin Herbert's throw to Keenan Allen was a beauty, and it made even better by the fact that the Cowboys cornerback, was it Trayvon Diggs, was at full stretch and it just like sailed over his fingertips straight into the arms of Keenan Allen. So that was a wonderful play. But also I would give a shout out to my very own Jalen Hurts, to Quez Watkins, 91-yard completion. The Eagles at the point where they were in their own end zone, backed right up at I think it was their own 3-yard line or something like that, and he bombs one down the sideline to Quez Watkins, who almost takes it in. I think it was a horse collar on that play, but almost takes it in. So yeah, those are 2 honourable mentions for me.
Was 91 yards not enough?
No, well, we didn't punch it in. We did not punch it in, so no, it wasn't.
Josh, your play of the week.
Yeah, I've got to give love to the special teams here. Jamal Agnew getting a 102-yard kickoff return touchdown in the Jags loss to Denver. We have a kickoff return touchdown at long last. God, it feels like forever since I've said those words. And I have to admit, those are the sort of players that made me fall in love with the NFL in the first place. Now, the first Super Bowl I ever watched was Super Bowl 41, I think it was, Indy versus Chicago. Where Devin Hester, literally the first play of the Super Bowl, scored on a kickoff return touchdown. And those are the sort of plays I love. And it was a fantastic move, especially when you consider just how difficult it is to do nowadays. So hats off to him on that one.
Everyone loves a kickoff return touchdown because there's just a couple of seconds of madness in the middle of the field where you're not quite sure where the ball is or the runner is, and all of a sudden he just emerges and then he's got a couple of blockers and he gets it in. It's such a rarity, but I agree, it's such a rare gem in the NFL when it does happen.
Yeah, the other specials team player to give a shout out to, Matt Prater, knocking through a 62-yarder, which felt like it would have been good from about 72 yards as well, to be fair. He's got a hell of a leg on him, hasn't he? There was a few plays that were quite similar this week, I felt, in terms of the Damien Harris one. It felt like he should have been brought down earlier than he was. I also think there's the Travis Kelce one that, let's face it, that was a bit of a broken play. And, again, he probably should have been tackled at about the 40-yard line and rumbled all the way into the end zone. I'm going to give some love, though, to a Cleveland Brown to end the podcast. His first NFL touchdown, his first NFL catch, let alone his first NFL touchdown catch. Yeah, Demetric Felton.
Yeah, it was excellent.
Brilliant catch. Spin move, took out 3 defenders, and he rumbled into the end zone after breaking a few more tackles as well. So plenty of highlights this week. Lots and lots of good plays. Lots and lots of good action. If you haven't done so yet, make sure you go and check it all out on Game Pass. Get your Sunday in 60. Always worth a watch if you want to catch the best bits from all the games. We'll be back later in the week, fellas, to preview week 3. Can't believe we're already talking about week 3 already. The season is flying by, but it's been great fun. Hope everybody enjoyed week number 2. If you haven't done so already, please do go and check out all the brilliant content that's on the site. And as we said earlier, make sure you go and give Josh plenty of hell for his power rankings, which will go up later on tonight. We'll be back on Thursday. Until then, boys, thanks ever so much. Keep it all tuned to Full 10 Yards.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. Don't forget to find us on all our social channels, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok and YouTube. Head over to our website, full10yards.com, where you can find out more information about why we are #4the game.